thank you. Wanted to touch on the world on fire that you mentioned, but let's start, if we could, with your references to Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. Giving the Panama Canal is why Jimmy Carter lost the election, in my opinion, more so maybe than the hostages. The hostages were a big deal. But if you remember, and nobody wants to talk about the Panama Canal now because, you know, it's inappropriate, I guess, but because it's a bad part of the Carter legacy. But he was a good man. Look, he was a good man. I knew him a little bit, and he was a very fine person, but that was a big mistake. Giving the Panama Canal to Panama was a very big mistake. We lost 38,000 people. It cost us the equivalent of $1 trillion, maybe more than that. Probably the most expensive, they say it was the most expensive structure, if we call it a structure, which I guess you can, ever built. And giving that away was a horrible thing. And I believe that's why Jimmy Carter lost the election, even more so than the hostages. Those two things.
If I could follow up on Ukraine and Iran, the two negotiations you'll be heading into. On Ukraine, you said just before it's a lot more complicated now.
Much more complicated.
Do you believe...
Because it would have never started.
Right, but it has started. You've
well,
got
not only started, the cities are largely knocked down.
So you've got what you've got. At this point, to hold on to leverage in dealing with President Putin, would you make a commitment to the Ukrainians that you will keep supporting them during the negotiations?
Well, I wouldn't tell you if that were the case.
Would you make a commitment to provide a security guarantee if they do enter into an armistice or a ceasefire along the lines that the French and the Germans?
So, you know, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that. That's been like written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now.
They can never join NATO.
Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal, and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO. And that's always been, and nobody knows more about NATO than I. You know, years ago when I first started this, I didn't know too much about NATO, but I got it right anyway. I said they're taking advantage. I'm the one that got, and the Secretary General was here, as you know, 2 weeks ago, saying that if it weren't for me, NATO wouldn't even exist right now, because I raised from countries that weren't paying their bills. At that time, 28 countries, 20 of them were not paying their bills, 21 to be exact. They weren't paying, or they were paying a very small portion. And I raised over $680 billion, that was the number he gave, by saying, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. And as soon as I said that, the money came pouring in. But Obama could have said it. Other people could have said it. Bush could have said it. Nobody said it but me. I took a lot of heat. They said, oh, that's a threatening statement. Well, they weren't paying their bills. I said, we're not going to protect you if you're not paying the bills. So in a true sense, I saved NATO, but NATO's taken advantage of us. And one of the problems that I have, and I've said it openly, I said it to President Zelensky, Europe is in for a tiny fraction of the money that we're in. Now, whether you like that situation or not, Europe is much more affected than the United States. We have a thing called the ocean in between us, right? Why are we in for billions and billions of dollars more money than Europe? And, you know, they're a similar size, a little smaller, but they're a similar size economy as the United States when you add them up. And yet Europe is in for a small fraction of the number the United States is in. Now, Biden could have called them up during the term. That's what I did. I said, you have to pay your bills. And they all, one stood up. I won't say who. You'll probably have it because the papers, the media hated to report on it. But a prime minister stood up from a country, you know, a famous meeting of 28 nations with no press, no anybody in the room. He stood up. He says, does that mean if we don't pay our bill, and at that point it was 2%, it should be 5%. It should be 5%, not 2%. But at that point it was 2%, but many people didn't pay. Some people didn't pay anything. But many people were way, including Germany. Germany was at less than 1%.
You're going to press for 5%?
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, you know, they're in dangerous territory. I think it should be, they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%. I'm the one that got them to pay 2%. But a gentleman stood up, a prime minister stood up, and he said to me, sir, could I ask you a question? You're saying we have to pay our bills. If we don't pay our bills, will the United States protect us from Russia? I said, if you don't pay, you mean you're delinquent? He said, yes. He said, if you're delinquent, we will not protect you. I took a lot of heat. Although it was somewhat closed door, I took a lot of heat from the media. And you know what happened? The money started pouring in. That's why NATO has money. And the Secretary General said it was the most incredible thing he had ever seen in a negotiation. Now, if I would have said, yes, we will, nobody would have paid. If I would have loved to say, yes, we'll protect you even if you don't pay. But that's not the way life works.